The Great Hall of the Galactic Council had never been so quiet. Ambassador Kethvar stood at the center of the circular room, her crystal body flickering with nervous energy. Around her, representatives from 1,000 worlds sat in silence. Their faces showed the same emotion, fear. The war was lost. Everyone knew it, but no one wanted to say it out loud. The Devourers had returned after sleeping for 10,000 years. They were machines, ancient and hungry. They ate planets whole, turning everything they touched into more of themselves. Wherever they went, stars went dark. Entire civilizations vanished without a trace. The greatest military minds in the galaxy had tried everything. The proud Valkorian Empire sent their best warriors. They died in minutes. The smart Nethys Coalition built new weapons that could cut through anything. The Devourers adapted and made the weapons useless. Even the fierce Drakmor clans, who had never lost a battle, ran away screaming. Nothing worked. The machines learned too fast. Every trick, every weapon, every strategy, they copied it and made it better. The Devourers were now only days away from the core worlds where billions lived. Kethvar looked around the room. She saw defeat in every face. These were the smartest, strongest beings in the galaxy, and they had no answers left. "There is one option," she said finally. Her voice was barely a whisper, but in the silent hall everyone heard her. "The Deathworld Protocol." The room exploded. Voices rose in anger and disgust. Someone threw a chair. The representative from Theta Prime actually fainted. The Deathworld Protocol was the galaxy's most shameful secret. It was a plan made by desperate people for desperate times. The idea was simple and horrible. Contact the savage species that lived on Deathworlds and ask them to fight. Deathworlds were planets that should not have life. The gravity crushed bones. The air burned lungs. Storms could level mountains. Predators lurked everywhere, and the planet itself tried to kill anything that moved. Most civilized species avoided these worlds completely, but somehow impossibly life existed on these nightmare planets. Not just plants or simple animals, but thinking beings. Species that had evolved in hell and called it home. The galaxy knew about 12 such worlds, and they feared all of them. "You cannot be serious," said General Vorth of the Valkorian Empire. His forearms shook with rage. "Those things are barely better than animals. They solve every problem with violence. They are savages. They are our only hope," Kethvar replied. She pulled up a hologram showing the advancing Devourer fleet. Red dots covered half the galaxy. "In 3 days they will reach Century Prime. In 7 days they will be here. We have no other choices left." The debate went on for hours. Some argued it was better to die with honor than to ask monsters for help. Others said the Deathworlders were too primitive to understand the danger. A few worried that saving the galaxy by unleashing savages might not be saving it at all. But in the end, fear won. Fear of the Devourers, fear of extinction, fear of being the generation that let civilization die. The vote was close, but it passed. Within hours, automated ships launched toward 12 different Deathworlds. Each carried the same message, translated into every language the galaxy knew. The message was simple. The galaxy is dying. Ancient machines have returned. They eat worlds and cannot be stopped by normal means. We need beings who know how to survive the impossible. If your people value more than just staying alive, please help us. Time is running out. Most of the council expected no answer. These were primitive worlds. Some had barely learned to use fire. Others had just figured out how to leave their planets. None of them had the technology to reach the core worlds quickly, even if they wanted to help. The council prepared for the end. Evacuation ships loaded with the most important people and artifacts. Emergency bunkers stocked with supplies. Weapons that might delay the Devourers for a few more hours. 3 days passed. The Devourers reached Century Prime right on schedule. The planet died in 6 hours. 7 billion people became raw material for more machines. Then the first response arrived. It came from a small blue-green world in a system called Sol, the third planet from their sun, according to the star charts. The transmission was crude and full of static, but the words were clear. "This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the United Earth Defense Force. We got your message. We are coming to help. We will arrive in 72 hours. Hold on." The council stared at the message in shock. 72 hours? The nearest death world was weeks away, even with the fastest ships in the galaxy. Either these humans were lying, or they had technology that made no sense. Kethvar pulled up everything the galaxy knew about Sol 3. The data made her crystal form dim with worry. The planet was a nightmare. Gravity that would crush most species, weather that changed without warning, an atmosphere that was poisoned to half the known races, oceans full of salt that would burn through skin, and covering it all, billions of creatures that had evolved to kill. The humans were the worst of all. They were persistence predators. They chased their prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. They had forward-facing eyes like hunters. Their teeth were designed for tearing meat. They even ate plants that tried to poison them just because they liked the taste. But the strangest thing about humans was their behavior around other humans. They formed groups called families and would die to protect them. They adopted beings that were not even their own species. They kept predators as pets and cried when the pets died. The galaxy had a few reports from traders who had visited human space. The stories were all the same. Humans who refused to die when they should. Humans who made friends with their enemies. Humans who found joy in danger and laughed at death itself. "What have we done?" whispered the representative from Arcturus 7. Kethavar did not answer. She was looking at a star map, watching red dots advance toward the core worlds. In 72 hours, they would know if the humans were their salvation or just another way to die. Exactly 72 hours later, space lit up with new arrivals. 300 ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of Council space. They were strange ships, built heavy and strong like they expected to crash into things. Their hulls were scarred and patched, but they moved with deadly grace. A transmission came from the lead ship. "This is Admiral Chen. We are here. Where do you need us?" Kethavar looked at the human fleet on her screens. She had asked for soldiers from the Deathworlds. What she got was something she did not expect and did not understand. She had asked for killers. The humans had sent family. The war was about to change in ways no one could imagine. Admiral Sarah Chen stepped off the shuttle and into the Council's flagship. The artificial gravity was too light, the air too thin, but she had expected that. Humans were built for a world that tried to kill them. This clean, safe ship felt almost fragile. Ambassador Kethavar waited for her in the docking bay. The crystal being was beautiful in an alien way, but Chen could see the stress fractures running through her body. Fear had a way of showing itself no matter what species you were. "Admiral Chen," Kethavar said through her translator device, "welcome aboard the Harmony of Stars. I must admit we did not expect such a quick response." Chen smiled. It was not a gentle expression on a human face. "When someone calls for help, you answer fast. That is how it works where I come from." The briefing room was full of alien military officers. They all stared at Chen as she walked in. She was shorter than most of them, but she moved like a predator. Her eyes scanned the room, noting exits and weapons. Old habits from a death world. General Vorth of the Valkorian Empire spoke first. "Human, we appreciate your arrival, but I must ask, how did you travel so far so quickly? Our fastest ships would take months to cover that distance." Chen sat down without being invited. The chair was too big for her, but she made it work. "We did not build our ships to be comfortable. We built them to be fast and tough. When you live on a world that wants to kill you, you learn to move quick and hit hard." She activated a holographic display showing human ship designs. The aliens leaned back in surprise. Human vessels looked more like weapons than transportation. They were covered in armor, bristling with guns, and built to survive impacts that would destroy normal ships. "Your ships look like warships," observed Admiral Theiss of the Nethys Coalition. "Everything on Earth is a warship if you use it right." Chen replied, "We have been fighting our own planet for millions of years. Fighting machines from space is just Tuesday for us." Kethavar brought up tactical displays of the Devourers. "Admiral, these are not ordinary enemies. They adapt to every weapon, every strategy. They learn from every battle and become stronger. Our greatest minds have tried everything." Chen studied the data for several minutes. The aliens watched her carefully, looking for signs of fear or despair. Instead, her smile got wider. "I see the problem," she said finally. "What problem?" General Vorth demanded. "You are thinking like prey," Chen explained. "You see something dangerous and you want to avoid it or outrun it. That is smart for most species. But humans are predators. When we see something dangerous, we want to know how to kill it." She stood up and walked to the holographic display. Her fingers moved through the images of Devourer ships, studying their design. These machines are smart, but they think like machines. They expect logic. They expect their enemies to do the smart thing. But humans learned a long time ago that the smart thing is not always the right thing. Admiral Thiss leaned forward. What do you mean? You have been fighting them like this is a chess game. Move and countermove, strategy and tactics. But some fights are not chess games. Some fights are bar fights, and humans are very good at bar fights. Chen activated her communication device. Captain Rodriguez, please join us in briefing room 7. A few minutes later, Captain Maria Rodriguez entered the room. She was even smaller than Chen, but she carried herself like she could fight anyone in the room and win. Scars covered her visible skin, and her left arm was clearly artificial. Captain Rodriguez commands our assault division, Chen explained. Maria, show them the Kepler station plan. Rodriguez grinned and pulled up new tactical displays. Kepler station is surrounded by 50 Devourer ships. Standard military thinking says that is impossible odds. Standard military thinking is boring. The plan she showed made the alien officers gasp in horror. Human ships would dive into the planet's atmosphere. Using the crushing gravity and storm systems as weapons, they would emerge from the clouds at point-blank range and engage the Devourers in close combat. This is suicide, whispered Kethvar. No, Rodriguez corrected. Suicide is when you have no chance of winning. This is just really stupid. But stupid works when the enemy expects you to be smart. General Vorth's forearms waved in agitation. Your ships will be destroyed by the atmospheric pressure alone. Maybe, Rodriguez admitted. But our ships are built to survive Deathworld conditions. We fly through hurricanes for fun back home. And Devourer ships are built for space combat. They are not designed to handle weather. Chen took over the briefing. The real trick is not the space battle. The real trick is what happens after we land on the station. Devourers have never lost a ground fight because they adapt faster than any enemy they have faced. And you think you can adapt faster? Admiral Thiss asked. We do not need to adapt faster, Chen replied. We just need to be more stubborn than they are smart. The briefing continued for hours. The aliens asked countless questions, but the answers always came back to the same thing. Humans did not fight the way civilized species fought. They did not calculate odds or minimize losses. They looked at impossible situations and asked not, how do we survive this? But how do we win this? As the meeting ended, Kethavar approached Chen privately. Admiral, I must ask, why are you helping us? Your species could flee to the outer rim. You could survive this war. Chen looked at her with those forward-facing predator eyes. Ambassador, let me explain something about humans. We have a saying on Earth, no one fights alone. When someone calls for help, we answer. That is who we are. But we are strangers to you. We have nothing to offer in return. You asked for help? Chen said simply. That is enough. The assault on Kepler Station began 6 hours later. The alien fleet watched in amazement and horror as human ships dove into the planet's atmosphere like bullets. Lightning struck their hulls. Winds that could level cities tossed them around like toys. The atmospheric pressure should have crushed them flat. Instead, they emerged from the storm clouds completely undamaged and opened fire on the Devourer fleet at point-blank range. The space battle was brief and brutal. Devourer ships tried to adapt to human weapons, but the humans kept changing tactics. When energy weapons stopped working, they switched to projectile weapons. When the Devourers adapted to those, the humans started ramming them. The real shock came during the ground assault. Human soldiers charged directly at Devourer ground units that had never been defeated. They used weapons that made no sense. Explosive devices in enclosed spaces, projectile weapons that could damage their own ships, fighting techniques that put them in more danger than their enemies. But it worked. For the first time in the war, Devourer forces retreated. The battle reports came in over the next few hours. Kepler Station was saved. All civilians evacuated successfully. Devourer casualties were higher than in any previous engagement. Human casualties were also high, but the humans did not seem to care. They celebrated the victory like they had won a game instead of barely surviving a nightmare. They are insane, General Vorth muttered as he watched the reports. Yes, Kethvar agreed, but they are insane now. On the human flagship Endurance, Admiral Chen looked at star maps showing Devourer positions. The machines were already adapting to human tactics, but she was not worried. Humans had been adapting to kill them longer than these machines had existed. This war was not over, but for the first time since it began, the galaxy had hope. And hope, as any human could tell you, was the most dangerous weapon in the universe. The victory at Kepler Station changed everything. Word spread through the galaxy that the Devourers could be beaten. For the first time in months, Civilian populations stopped fleeing. Military units that had been preparing for final stand started planning counterattacks. But the real change happened in the combined fleet itself. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, the human fleet's chief scientist, noticed it first. She was working in the medical bay of the Endurance when a wounded Drakmor warrior was brought in. The reptilian soldier had taken plasma burns across his chest during the Kepler assault. "I will heal," the warrior growled as Dr. Tanaka examined his wounds. "Drakmor do not show weakness." "Nobody here thinks you are weak," Tanaka replied, applying healing gel to the burns. "You charged a devourer position to save my people. That makes you family." The warrior's eyes went wide. In Drakmor culture, calling someone family was reserved for blood relatives. But the human doctor meant it. Over the next few days, Tanaka checked on his recovery personally, brought him food he could eat, and talked to him about his home world. Other humans did the same thing with other alien crew members. They learned names, shared meals, and treated injuries with the same care they gave their own people. Within a week, something unprecedented happened. Species that had been polite allies became something deeper. Ambassador Kethvar watched this transformation with growing alarm. She had expected the humans to be useful weapons. Instead, they were changing the fundamental nature of the galactic military. "Admiral Chen," she said during their morning briefing, "we need to discuss your crew's behavior." Chen looked up from tactical reports. "What about it?" "They are becoming too attached to our personnel. Military efficiency requires maintaining proper distance between different species and command structures." "Ambassador," Chen said slowly, "are you asking me to tell my people to care less about their fellow soldiers?" "I am suggesting that emotional attachments compromise tactical decision-making." Chen stood up and walked to the window showing the combined fleet. Human ships flew in formation with Valkorian cruisers and Nethys science vessels. The sight should have been impossible. Species that had barely trusted each other now coordinated like they had trained together for years. "Let me tell you about Sergeant Williams," Chen said. 2 days ago, his unit was pinned down by Devourer, forces on Mining Station Beta 7. Standard military doctrine would have been to call for orbital support and level the entire sector. That would have been the logical choice. Kethvar agreed. Except Williams knew that 3 Xanthari technicians were trapped in that sector. They were not his people. They were not even his species. But they had shared coffee with him that morning. They had shown him pictures of their families. So instead of calling for bombardment, he led a rescue mission through 3 levels of Devourer-controlled territory. Kethvar checked her records. The mission succeeded, but at significant cost. 2 humans died and 4 more were injured. "Yes," Chen agreed. "And those 3 Xanthari technicians are now working around the clock to decode Devourer communication patterns. They volunteered for dangerous assignments. They pushed themselves beyond normal limits. Do you know why? Why? Because Sergeant Williams died for them. Because humans they barely knew treated them like family. Because for the first time in their lives, they understand what it means to be worth dying for." The conversation was interrupted by an emergency alert. Long-range sensors had detected a massive Devourer fleet heading for the Arcturus system. 12 billion people lived there, and the system's defenses would not last an hour. The Council's military advisors gathered quickly. The tactical situation was hopeless. The Devourers had committed over 500 ships, more than the entire combined fleet could handle. Admiral Thys ran the calculations 3 times and came to the same conclusion. "We cannot save Arcturus," he announced. "We must evacuate what we can and fall back to defensive positions." "Like hell we will," Captain Rodriguez said from the back of the room. General Vorth turned to face her. "Captain, this is not a discussion. The mathematics are clear. We cannot win this battle. General, with respect, mathematics do not account for human factors." Rodriguez moved to the tactical display and began highlighting targets. "The Devourer fleet is spread out to cover all escape routes from Arcturus. Standard formation for a harvesting operation. They expect us to either run away or attack their strongest point. What do you suggest?" Admiral Thys asked. "We split our forces," Rodriguez explained. "Small human units hit them from 12 different directions at once. Not trying to win, just trying to cause chaos. While they are distracted trying to adapt to our attacks, the main alien fleet punches through their weakest point and evacuates the civilians." It was a terrible plan. The human units would be vastly outnumbered. Most of them would not survive. But Chen nodded her approval. "How many volunteers will you need?" she asked. Every human ship has already volunteered, Rodriguez replied. But that is not the strange part. Admiral, we have requests from over 200 alien vessels asking to join the assault units. Kethavar checked her datapad in shock. It was true. Drakmor warriors, Nethys scientists, even cautious Zenthari diplomats were volunteering for what was essentially a suicide mission. Why? She whispered. Dr. Tanaka answered from her position at the medical station. Because humans taught them something new, Ambassador. We taught them that some things are worth dying for, and some people are worth living for. The Battle of Arcturus was unlike anything in galactic history. Human ships dove into the Devourer fleet like wolves attacking a herd. They used ramming tactics, suicide runs, and weapons that damaged their own vessels as much as the enemy. But they were not alone. Drakmor warriors flew alongside them, roaring battle cries in broken English. Nethys vessels used their superior sensors to guide human attacks while exposing themselves to enemy fire. Zenthari ships that were designed for diplomacy carried boarding parties into the heart of enemy formations. The Devourers adapted quickly, but they could not adapt to chaos itself. Human tactics made no sense. A human captain would sacrifice his ship to save a single alien crew member. Human Marines would charge into certain death to buy their alien comrades 30 more seconds to escape. The machines could not calculate the value of these actions. They could not understand why beings would choose death over logical retreat. Their adaptive algorithms began making errors, trying to account for variables that had no mathematical meaning. While the assault units created havoc, the main evacuation fleet punched through the Devourer lines. Transport ships that should have been helpless became deadly when crewed by beings who refused to abandon each other. Civilian vessels turned into weapons when their crews decided that saving others was worth any risk. The battle lasted 8 hours. When it ended, every civilian in the Arcturus system had been evacuated. The Devourer fleet was scattered and damaged. But the cost was terrible. Nearly half the assault units were destroyed. In the aftermath, something remarkable happened. Instead of celebrating victory or mourning losses, the combined fleet held a memorial service. Humans and aliens stood together, sharing stories about the dead. They spoke in multiple languages, but the meaning was the same. These people died for family. Admiral Chen delivered the final speech at the memorial. Today we learned something important, she said. The Devourers think wars about numbers and calculations. They think beings can be reduced to mathematical equations. But they are wrong. She gestured to the mixed crowd of humans and aliens. War is not about mathematics. It is about who you are willing to die for, and who is willing to die for you. The Devourers can adapt to our weapons and our tactics, but they cannot adapt to love. Ambassador Kethavar stood in her quarters that night, looking at reports from the battle. The numbers told one story, a costly victory that had barely delayed the inevitable. But there were other numbers that told a different story. Recruitment for dangerous missions was up 300%. Interspecies cooperation had reached levels that sociologists said was impossible. Civilian populations that had been fleeing the war zone were now volunteering to help with military operations. The humans had not just brought new weapons to the war. They had brought a new way of thinking about war itself. They had taught the galaxy that the strongest force in the universe was not technology, or numbers, or tactics. The strongest force in the universe was refusing to let family fight alone. Outside her window, the combined fleet moved toward the next battle. Human ships flew in formation with alien vessels, their crews working together like they had been born to it. The sight should have been impossible, but humans specialized in making impossible things happen. The war was far from over, but something fundamental had changed. The galaxy was no longer fighting for survival, they were fighting for each other. The Nethys research vessel Wisdom of Ages drifted silently in space, its engines dead and hull breached in 3 places. Inside, Commander Zeftai and her crew of 12 scientists huddled in the emergency shelter, watching their oxygen supply tick down towards 0. They had been studying Devourer communication patterns when the ambush happened. 6 enemy ships had appeared from nowhere, weapons already charging. The Wisdom of Ages was a science vessel, not a warship. It had lasted exactly 4 minutes in combat. Now they were trapped in hostile territory. Waiting to die, Commander, reported her aide. Yixtal, our emergency beacon is broadcasting, but the nearest Allied forces are 6 days away. Our life support will last 18 hours. Zeftai nodded calmly. She was Nethys, a species that had learned to accept reality without emotion. Death was simply another data point in the universe. Begin recording final research logs. Our data on devourer neural patterns must be preserved. The crew began their work with quiet efficiency. They were scientists even at the end. Their deaths would at least serve some purpose. 12 hours later, their sensors detected incoming ships. Devourer vessels coming to finish what they had started. HFY watched the approaching fleet with professional interest. At least their deaths would be quick. But the ships that dropped out of faster-than-light travel were not devourers. They were human vessels, 3 destroyers and a cruiser from Admiral Chen's fleet. As HFY watched in amazement, the human ships opened fire on the devourer patrol. The battle was brief and brutal. The humans used their usual tactics, ramming, close-range weapons, and maneuvers that should have been suicide. 2 devourer ships were destroyed, and the others retreated. Within an hour, human Marines were cutting through the hull of the Wisdom of Ages. Commander HFY? The voice belonged to a young human female wearing combat armor. I'm Sergeant Lisa Park. We're here to get you out. HFY stared at the human in confusion. Sergeant, how did you know we were here? Our emergency beacon has limited range. Dr. Tanaka picked up your distress signal, Park explained as her team set up life support equipment. She said you guys shared lunch with her last week. Something about discussing protein structures in alien biology. That is correct, but I do not understand. Why did you risk 4 ships to rescue a science crew? Our tactical value is minimal. Sergeant Park looked at her like she had asked why water was wet. Ma'am, your family. That's all the reason we need. The rescue operation took 6 hours. The human ships had to fight their way through 2 more devourer patrols, taking heavy damage in the process. By the time they reached Allied space, 1 destroyer was leaking atmosphere, and the cruiser's main engines were offline. But every member of the Wisdom of Ages crew was alive. The incident became a legend throughout the combined fleet. Not because of the tactical brilliance or the heroic fighting, but because of the simple fact that humans had risked everything to save people they barely knew. Dr. Yuki Tanaka tried to explain it to Ambassador Kethvar during their weekly briefing. It's basic pack behavior, she said, sipping coffee that was toxic to most alien species. You eat with us, you work with us, you share stories with us, you're pack. That means we don't abandon you. But the tactical cost was enormous, Kethvar protested. Those 4 ships could have been used for strategic operations. Ambassador, let me ask you something. If you were trapped and dying and you knew that somewhere in the galaxy there were people who would risk everything to save you, how hard would you fight for them? Kethvar considered the question. In her crystal body, emotions appeared as colored patterns. Right now, those patterns were complex and conflicted. The Nethys crew has volunteered for 14 high-risk missions since their rescue, Tanaka continued. Commander HFY personally requested assignment to our most dangerous research projects. Her team works 18-hour days without complaint. Do you know why? Why? Because they understand something most species never learn. They understand what it feels like to be valued not for what you can do, but for who you are. They know that if they die tomorrow, someone will remember their names. Someone will mourn them. Someone will make sure their families know they died with honor. The conversation was interrupted by an emergency alert. The Drakmor homeworld was under attack. The tactical briefing was chaos. Drakmor Prime was one of the galaxy's most heavily defended worlds, but the Devourers had committed over 1,000 ships to its conquest. The planet's population of 8 billion warriors would fight to the last breath, but they could not win against such overwhelming numbers. Worse, Drakmor Prime was deep in enemy territory. Any rescue mission would have to fight through multiple Devourer strongholds just to reach the planet. The mathematics are clear, Admiral Theiss announced grimly. We cannot mount an effective rescue operation. The losses would be catastrophic. So we just let them die? Asked Captain Rodriguez. We preserve our forces for battles we can win, General Vorth replied. This is basic military strategy. Rodriguez stood up, her face flushed with anger. General, there are 500 Drakmor warriors in this fleet. Are you going to look them in the eye and tell them we're abandoning their families? The briefing room fell silent. Everyone knew the Drakmor contingent had been among the most effective fighters in the war. They had followed human leaders into impossible battles, adopting human tactical doctrines that went against every instinct of their warrior culture. Admiral Chen spoke quietly. How many ships volunteer for the rescue mission? Admiral, Admiral Thiss protested. "You cannot be serious. This violates every principle of military efficiency." "I'm not asking about military efficiency. I'm asking how many ships volunteer." The answer came within minutes. Every human vessel volunteered immediately. But the real shock was the rest of the list. Nethys science ships requested to join the assault fleet. Xanthari diplomatic vessels offered themselves as troop transports. Even species that had no connection to the Drakmor asked to help. "Why?" Kethiver whispered, looking at the volunteer list. "Most of these crews have never even spoken to a Drakmor warrior." Commander Zeftai, who had been quietly observing the briefing, answered, "Because we learned from humans that family is not about species or biology. Family is about choice. The Drakmor chose to fight beside us. We choose to fight beside them." The rescue fleet that launched toward Drakmor Prime was the largest multi-species operation in galactic history. 300 ships crewed by dozens of different species, united by something that military textbooks had no name for. The journey took 4 days, fighting through Devourer patrols that grew stronger the deeper they went into enemy space. The fleet lost 30 ships before they even reached the target system, but they kept going. The battle for Drakmor Prime lasted 16 hours. The combined fleet punched through orbital defenses while human and Drakmor forces fought side by side on the planet's surface. Alien crews who had never been in ground combat picked up weapons and joined the fight. The evacuation was a nightmare. 8 billion warriors and their families had to be loaded onto ships while under constant attack. The Devourers adapted their tactics hourly, throwing new weapons and strategies against the rescue fleet. But every time the machines adapted, the organic crews adapted faster. When energy shields failed, they used debris as cover. When communications were jammed, they used hand signals developed for Deathworld survival. When ammunition ran low, they improvised weapons from whatever they could find. The final phase of the evacuation came down to a single transport ship, the Harmony's Dream. Overloaded with 3,000 Drakmor civilians, Devourer fighters were closing in for the kill when the human destroyer Defiant placed itself between the transport and the enemy. Captain Sarah Kim broadcast on all frequencies. "Harmony's Dream. You are clear to jump. We'll hold them off." "Captain," came the reply. "There are 12 enemy fighters. You cannot survive that engagement." "Maybe not," Kim replied. "But that's not the point. The point is that you get home safe. Give my regards to Admiral Chen." The Defiant lasted 7 minutes against impossible odds. When it finally died, the explosion took 4 Devourer fighters with it. The Harmony's Dream escaped with its precious cargo. The rescue mission saved 7.5 billion lives. It also cost the combined fleet nearly 100 ships and 20,000 crew members. By any mathematical analysis, it was a strategic disaster. By human standards, it was Tuesday. In the aftermath, something unprecedented happened. Drakmor warriors, known throughout the galaxy for their fierce independence, formally requested integration into human command structures. Other species followed suit. The rigid military hierarchy that had defined galactic warfare for millennia dissolved into something new. They called it Pack Protocol. Instead of species-based command structures, the fleet organized itself around bonds of trust and shared sacrifice. Human captains commanded alien crews. Alien officers led human soldiers. Species that had been enemies for centuries worked together like they were born to it. Ambassador Kethiver tried to explain it in her reports to the Council. The humans have weaponized friendship. They have turned emotional attachment into a military doctrine. It should not work, but it does. The truth was simpler and more dangerous than military doctrine. The Devourer superweapon hung in space like a metal moon, its surface covered with weapons that could crack planets. Around it, 10,000 enemy ships formed a defensive sphere that stretched from the edge of Nexus Prime's atmosphere to its outermost moon. In the command center of the Endurance, Admiral Chen stared at the tactical display with the grim satisfaction of someone who had found the perfect way to die. "Final analysis," reported Admiral Thice, his voice hollow with despair. "The Devourer fleet outguns our entire combined force by a ratio of 25 to 1. Their superweapon can destroy any target within 3 light years. Our best computer models give us a survival probability of 0.003%. So basically impossible," Captain Rodriguez observed, cracking her knuckles. "Completely impossible," this confirmed. "Good. Chen said, smiling that predatory human smile. I was worried this might be too easy. The Emergency War Council included representatives from every major species in the galaxy. They had gathered on the Endurance because it had become the unofficial flagship of the combined fleet, and Admiral Chen had become the unofficial leader of the galaxy's last stand. Admiral, Ambassador Kethvar said carefully, perhaps it is time to consider alternative strategies. The Outer Rim colonies could sustain civilization for several millennia. We could preserve our species and cultures while abandoning 12 billion people on Nexus Prime. Chen interrupted. The mathematics are clear, General Vorth stated. We cannot save everyone. Military doctrine demands that we preserve what forces we can. General, Dr. Tanaka said from her position at the medical station. Can I ask you a personal question? Vorth's forearms twitched in confusion. I suppose. Do you have children? Yes. 3 offspring, currently serving in the Valkorian fleet. And if they were trapped on Nexus Prime, surrounded by enemies, would you tell them that military doctrine demanded they be abandoned? Vorth was quiet for a long moment. That is different. They are family. No, Tanaka replied softly. That is exactly the same. Every person on that planet is someone's family. Every life we abandon is a choice to value mathematics over love. Chen stood up and walked to the main display. Computer, show me the structure of the Devourer superweapon. The hologram shifted to reveal the massive construct in detail. It was built like a fortress, with layer upon layer of defensive systems protecting a central core that pulsed with malevolent energy. I see 3 main problems, Chen announced. First, we can't get through their fleet. Second, we can't penetrate their defenses. Third, even if we could reach the weapons core, we don't have enough firepower to destroy it. Those are rather significant problems, observed Commander Zeftai of the Nethys delegation. Yes, Chen agreed, which is why we're not going to solve them. The room fell silent. Everyone stared at the human admiral, waiting for an explanation that would make sense. We're not going to fight through their fleet, Chen continued. We're going to crash through it. We're not going to penetrate their defenses. We're going to ignore them completely. And we're not going to destroy the weapons core with our firepower. We're going to do it with our bare hands. Captain Rodriguez laughed out loud. I love it when a plan is so stupid it comes back around to being brilliant. Chen activated a new tactical display. Here's what we're going to do. The main fleet engages their defensive perimeter and makes a lot of noise. Big explosions, dramatic charges, all the stuff they expect us to try. While their distracted volunteer assault ships punch through their lines using ramming tactics and crash land directly on the superweapon's surface. Crash land? Admiral Theiss repeated weakly. Our ships are built to survive Deathworld atmospheric entries, Rodriguez explained. We've all done emergency landings in hurricanes and acid storms. Landing on a space station is actually easier. But the defensive systems, Theiss protested, will be designed to stop incoming missiles and fighter craft, Chen interrupted. Not to stop 300-meter warships being used as guided meteors. Dr. Tanaka pulled up engineering schematics. Once we're inside the superweapon, we fight our way to the core using standard ground assault tactics. Except instead of capturing territory, we're planting enough explosives to crack the thing open like an egg. The casualty estimates for such an operation would be, General Vorth began. 100%. Chen finished. Everyone who goes on this mission dies. That's the plan. The room erupted in protests and objections, but Chen held up her hand for silence. I'm not ordering anyone to do this, she said quietly. I'm asking for volunteers. Anyone who wants to try the Outer Rim strategy is welcome to leave. But anyone who stays understands the deal. We all go home or nobody does. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Every human in the fleet volunteered within minutes. But the real shock came from the alien contingents. Commander Zeftai was the first. The Nethys Science Division formally requests assignment to the assault force. You're scientists, Chen protested. This is a combat mission. Admiral, Zeftai replied, you saved my life and the lives of my crew when mathematics said we were expendable. You taught us that some equations are worth ignoring. If you are willing to die for strangers, then we are willing to die for family. The Drakmor warriors were next, roaring their acceptance in battle songs that made the ship's hull vibrate. Then came the Zenthari diplomats, requesting assignment to cultural exchange operations with explosive devices. Even species that had no business in ground combat asked to help. In the end, over 60% of the combined fleet volunteered for the suicide mission. The assault began 18 hours later. The main fleet engaged the Devourer perimeter with everything they had, drawing attention and resources away from the superweapon itself. Energy beams lit up space like a deadly light show, while the two fleets hammered each other with weapons that could sterilize planets. While the enemy focused on the big battle, 47 volunteer ships broke formation and accelerated toward the superweapon at maximum speed. They came in from 12 different angles using debris and weapon flashes as cover. The Endurance led the charge, Admiral Chen at the helm personally. Behind her flew ships crewed by species that had learned to think like humans, to value courage over caution, family over mathematics, hope over logic. The superweapon's defensive systems opened fire, but they were designed for normal space combat. Missiles meant to intercept fighters passed harmlessly through formation gaps that shouldn't have existed. Energy beams calibrated for evasive targets missed ships that flew straight at them without turning. The first wave of assault ships hit the superweapon's surface like hammers striking an anvil. The impacts were visible from orbit, flashes of light as shields failed and hulls crumpled. But the ships were built to survive Deathworld conditions, and their crews were too stubborn to die easily. Emergency airlocks blew open, and assault teams poured out onto the superweapon's surface. Humans in environmental suits worked alongside Drakmor warriors in powered armor. Nethys scientists carried sensor equipment while Xanthari diplomats hauled explosive charges. The interior of the superweapon was a maze of corridors and defensive positions, all monitored by Devourer units that had never lost a ground engagement. But they had never fought beings who treated certain death as a tactical advantage. Sergeant Lisa Park led her mixed species unit through corridors that pulsed with deadly energy. When Devourer defenders blocked their path, she didn't look for cover or calculate firing angles. She looked at her team, 3 humans, 2 Drakmor, and a Nethys technician, and said the words that had become the motto of the combined fleet. Nobody fights alone. They charged. The battle inside the superweapon lasted 6 hours. Every corridor was contested, every junction was a battlefield. The Devourers adapted their tactics constantly, learning from each engagement and becoming more dangerous. But they couldn't adapt to sacrifice itself. They couldn't understand why a human medic would throw herself on a grenade to save an alien she'd met 3 days ago. They couldn't calculate the tactical value of a Drakmor warrior who sang lullabies to a dying enemy machine. Their algorithms began making errors. Critical systems were left undefended while they tried to counter attacks that made no logical sense. Decision trees broke down when faced with beings who chose love over survival. Admiral Chen and Ambassador Kethvar fought their way to the weapons core together, the crystal alien's body flickering with colors that meant determination. Around them, the superweapon was tearing itself apart as human-planted explosives detonated in cascade patterns. "Admiral," Kethvar said as they placed the final charges, "I need to know something. Why did your species answer our call? You could have hidden. You could have survived." Chen smiled as she armed the detonator. "Ambassador, let me tell you something about humans. We have a saying back home. When someone calls for help, you answer. It doesn't matter if they're strangers. It doesn't matter if you can't win. You answer. But why? Because that's who we are. That's who we choose to be." The explosion that destroyed the superweapon lit up the entire Nexus system. The shockwave tore through the Devourer fleet, overloading their adaptive networks and leaving them vulnerable to the waiting Allied forces. The battle for Nexus Prime lasted another 4 hours, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. Without their superweapon and central coordination, the Devourer fleet fell apart. Some units fought to the end. Others simply shut down, their programming unable to process defeat. When it was over, the galaxy was silent. Rescue ships combed through the debris, looking for survivors from the assault force. They found 47, scattered across the wreckage of the superweapon. Humans and aliens who had refused to die even when death was the logical choice. Admiral Chen was not among them. The memorial service was held on Nexus Prime, in the great plaza that had nearly become a tomb for 12 billion people. Representatives from 1,000 worlds attended, but the real speakers were the ordinary beings who had served with the assault force. Dr. Tanaka gave the final address. "Today we say goodbye to heroes," she began. But Admiral Chen would not want to be remembered as a hero. She would want to be remembered as family, as someone who understood that the most important thing in the universe is not living forever. It's making sure that the people you love get the chance to live it all. In the months that followed, the galaxy began to rebuild, but it was not the same galaxy that had existed before the war. The cold, efficient civilizations based on logic and mathematics were gone, replaced by something warmer and more chaotic. They called it the human doctrine, the idea that some things were worth dying for, and that even more things were worth living for. The belief that family was not about species or biology, but about choice and sacrifice. Species that had been enemies for millennia learned to work together. Military academies taught courses on emotional intelligence alongside tactical theory. Diplomatic corps included specialists in what they termed pack bonding dynamics. The Devourers were gone, but their greatest failure remained. They had tried to conquer a galaxy of individuals only to create a galaxy of family. And families, as any human could tell you, were the most dangerous things in the universe. On a small blue-green world in the Sol system, children learned about the Great War through stories passed down from those who had been there. They learned about Admiral Chen and Captain Rodriguez, about Dr. Tanaka and Sergeant Park. They learned about the aliens who had become human in all the ways that mattered. But most importantly, they learned the lesson that had saved the galaxy. When someone calls for help, you answer. Because that's who humans choose to be. And now, thanks to them, that's who everyone else chooses to be too.